If you ever find yourself in Staffordshire, England, and consider taking a shortcut off the motorway down a particularly dark road, I beg you to drive on and not look back. My name is Daniel, and I must tell my story to warn others in hopes that they never experience what I did. This memory haunts my nightmares to this very day. About a month ago, I had been driving on the motorway for a few hours after arriving at Manchester Airport. I had just returned from a business trip in America and was eagerly driving home to my girlfriend. My American friend, Ralph, was also set to travel to the UK in a few days, and I had been friends for years, and my girlfriend and his wife got along quite well. Despite it being 10 p.m., the motorway was unexpectedly busy, and I sat in barely moving traffic. Frustrated by the lack of movement, I decided to take a risk. I would turn off the motorway when possible and try a different route. I had no idea where I was going, but I estimated that staying on the motorway would mean sitting in traffic for a few more hours. After 10 minutes of driving off the motorway, I found myself completely lost, winding down a particularly dark, secluded road in the middle of the countryside. The road seemed unusually dark, with no street lamps or lights, and there were no houses around. I began to feel nervous, barely able to make out the road's curve in my headlights. As I continued driving, panic started to set in. I was lost, alone, in the pitch-black night, with no clear sense of where I was headed. Turning back was not an option by this point. I considered pulling over and sleeping in the car until morning, when I could set off again in daylight. That's when I noticed a faint light in the distance. Hoping it might be a house where I could get directions, I followed the light. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was a small inn. I parked on the bumpy lot and stepped out, examining the inn and the surrounding area. The only light was above the front door, casting a small glow in the middle of a dark void, like an oasis in a desert. The inn's sign was rusted and dirty, but clean enough for me to read: "The Grazing Rabbit." I entered the small reception area, which looked as though it hadn't been updated in over a century. The structure was mostly wood, and the carpet, with its swirling red patterns, gave off a smell of dust and damp. Behind the desk stood a receptionist, an older woman who appeared to be at least 80 or 85, dressed in a black, moth-eaten blouse and a scratched name badge I couldn't quite read. "May I help you?" the receptionist asked. "Yes, how much is it for one night? I decided to stay the night and set off in the morning." Continuing into the darkness, even with directions, felt unwise. "PS 624, she replied, her voice flat. Surprised by the low price, I handed her the exact change, and she produced a metal key, placing it on the counter. "Your room is number 2, first door on the right upstairs. Have a pleasant night," she said, smiling widely. I smiled back, thanked her, and went to retrieve my bag from the car. When I returned, she was gone. But I didn't think much of it. I was more focused on hauling my suitcase up the creaky wooden stairs. I found my room, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The room was basic. A wooden bed with a patterned duvet and pillow covers, a wardrobe, desk, chest of drawers, and a window with drawn curtains. It was late, so I quickly undressed, turned off the light, and lay down. Exhaustion soon overtook me, and I fell asleep. I awoke suddenly, nauseous and dizzy. Disoriented, I checked my watch. It was 1:20 a.m. Stepping to the window to get some fresh air, I opened the curtains and looked out. In the faint glow of the moonlight, I noticed a figure among the trees. The person appeared to be a man in tattered clothes, holding a lantern. He was far enough away that I couldn't make out his face. For a moment, I considered calling out to see if he needed help, but felt afraid to ask and avoided it. I awoke suddenly, completely overwhelmed. I noticed a figure among the trees. The person appeared to be a man in tattered clothes, but I couldn't make out his face. For a moment, I considered calling out to him to come back, but then I decided to call out instead. Ever deciding not to dwell on it, I returned to bed. The next morning, as I prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the memory of the man outside. I glanced out the window once more, noting how isolated the inn was. After packing up, I placed my room key on the counter and thanked the receptionist, who was now back at the desk. My thoughts drifted to the man I'd seen. Had I been imagining it? After reaching the car park, I noticed something that overshadowed all my previous concerns. My car had been severely vandalized. The windows were smashed, the body was crumpled, and the interior was in tatters. Realizing I couldn't drive home, I spent the rest of the day using the inn's phone to call my girlfriend. I explained the situation, and she contacted her uncle, who agreed to bring me a car in 2 to 3 days. Frustrated, but without alternatives, I resigned myself to wait. That evening, plagued by the events of the previous night, I decided to knock on the door of room number 1, hoping to meet another guest and perhaps feel less alone. No one answered. Strange. I went to bed early, hoping to avoid the unsettling thoughts that had begun to take hold. Yet again, I woke up around 1 a.m., feeling an eerie sense of déjà vu. This time I hesitated before looking out the window. When I did, I was paralyzed by fear. The man from the previous night was closer, standing just 10 to 12 feet from the inn, staring directly at my window. The next morning, I questioned the receptionist about him, but she only replied cryptically, "Sir, there are no other staff members at this hotel." My blood ran cold as she explained the inn's dark history. The grazing rabbit had once served as a temporary morgue after a nearby mine collapse killed countless workers. Many bodies had never been recovered. That night, despite my overwhelming fear, I somehow drifted off to sleep, only to be woken by a soft, rhythmic tapping on my window. The miner's face, bloody and decomposed, peered in, his bony hand clutching a rusty pickaxe. I covered myself with the duvet, too terrified to move, until I finally heard footsteps moving away from my door. Yes, the following morning, my girlfriend's uncle arrived with the car, and I left as quickly as I could. Yet, as I settled back into life, the memories of the grazing rabbit stayed with me, haunting my dreams. A few days later, I received a message from Ralph, telling me he had checked into the grazing rabbit and would stay for a few days. I felt a chill, knowing full well the horrors that awaited him. 3 days later, Ralph was found dead in room number 2, his body mutilated in the same way I had feared I might be. Since then, I've been plagued by nightmares and an unshakable feeling that I, too, am being watched. Please, If you ever come across the grazing rabbit, drive past. Whatever you do, do not stop. I hope my warning reaches you before it's too late. You might think I'm mad or that this is just a story, but I can assure you it's real. I can only pray that you heed my advice and avoid the grazing rabbit inn at all costs. Since Ralph's death, I've been left to grapple with a crushing sense of guilt. I sent him there, despite my own terrifying experience, thinking he'd be safe because it was daytime. The police investigation turned up nothing. They found no other staff or guests, only abandoned rooms and the haunting remains of a receptionist who should have been long dead. Each night, I relive those horrible moments, the tapping, the shadowy figure, and the hollow, rotted eyes staring back at me from the other side of the window. Even now, in the safety of my own home, I sometimes feel as though someone is watching. Shadows flicker in the corner of my vision, and I often wake to the faint sound of tapping, only to find nothing there. My girlfriend has since left, unable to cope with my constant paranoia and sleepless nights. I am alone, left only with my thoughts and the chilling memory of that place. I'm writing this now, hoping to rid myself of this burden, to pass the warning to anyone who might listen. Please, if you ever find yourself on that dark road in Staffordshire, do not stop. Keep driving and, whatever you do, never look back. My parents moved out to come by chance for some peace and quiet. I get it. They were always country folk and never really liked living in the city. Never mind that St. John's is hardly the biggest or busiest city in the world. It's still the city, and when they retired, they decided they wanted to get away from it. So they sold their home, bought a nice little house out in Come By Chance, and they've been doing pretty darn well ever since. We talk on the phone every few days, and they give me little updates on what's been going on in their neck of the woods. It's not a whole heck of a lot, but they seem pretty happy, so I can't fault them for that. Then, of course, once or twice every few months, I'll make the drive up to visit them. Come By Chance is a tiny town with a population of around 200, about an hour and a half out of St. John's. Aside from its unique name, that's really all there is to it. I guess there's an oil refinery in the area, but my parents don't live anywhere near that. It's a peaceful little place away from the troubles of the world, and when I get old enough, I might just retire out that way myself. The drive up there is just lovely, but I suppose you could say the same about most of Newfoundland. The vast road stretches on ahead, flanked on each side by lush greenery under a hazy gray sky that holds its own particular beauty. Some might call the view drab. Me, I adore it. I can put on some music or podcast and let myself sort of drift away as I cruise through the countryside. Sometimes you may see mountains looming in the distance, and if I can admire them for a while without taking my eyes off the road, I gladly will. Although, as I said, I make a point not to let my eyes wander too far from the road. You'll see the signs fairly often, bright yellow with stark black. They're impossible to miss. Be moose alert. They don't all have that exact message, but that's the gist of it. Save a life, it could be yours. Slow down. Moose around. Sometimes all they really need is a simple illustration of a wrecked car with a moose standing beside it. It gets the message across. I actually haven't seen a whole lot of moose out in my area, although I'm not so naive as to think that means there's none around. I've only ever encountered a moose on the road once, and that's actually what I'm writing about today. Honestly, I consider myself lucky to have only ever encountered a moose on the road that one time. That's the kind of encounter that can go south very quickly. And not in the same way that mine did. I don't think most people fully realize just how big a moose is. They tower over your car, massive animals on long, stilt-like legs. If you hit one, you'll knock the legs out from under it and likely get yourself crushed when it falls on your car. The signs are there for good reason. Anywho, as I mentioned, I have only ever encountered a moose on the road one time. And of course, this encounter wasn't exactly a typical one. It was roughly around mid-September a couple of years back when this all happened. I was on my way up to Come By Chance to celebrate my dad's 60th birthday, and I'd been cruising along merrily when I saw it. I suppose it was sometime around 7 in the evening. The sky had taken on a dusky purple shade, not unlike a bruise, and it was starting to get rather dark on the road. The road in question was just off the main highway. It wound and curved, offering me occasional glimpses of the ocean, though there was still plenty of forest on either side of me. I hadn't seen the moose at first, not until it stepped out in front of me, and thank God I had time to brake before I got too close. As the moose wandered further onto the road, I simply sat and watched it, marveling at this great beast. Or, I would have marveled if there was much to marvel at. Truth be told, this moose looked off. In the dim twilight, it was hard to put my finger on exactly why at first, but the longer I looked, the more I saw. I've seen moose before, and they're usually not so skinny. A bull moose like that should have been a lot bulkier. But instead, the poor thing looked like skin and bones. And speaking of bones, I wasn't sure if I was seeing its skin pressed tight against its ribs, or its actual exposed ribs. It was hard to say for sure. The coat also looked wrong. It took me a few moments to realize that the fur was white, as opposed to the usual color. I've only ever heard of white moose in passing. They're said to be exceptionally rare. But this one looked like it had just crawled out of a pit of mud. Its coat was stained and grimy. The poor thing almost looked wounded. Is it wounded? The moose stopped in the middle of the road, lingering for a moment and looking lost. I just stared at it, knowing something was very wrong with this animal, and after a while I noticed that it was staring back at me. Its eyes looked sunken, and I'm still not sure to this day whether or not there were even eyes in those sockets, or if they were completely empty. In fact, I wasn't entirely convinced I wasn't just looking at a bare skull. Half-shed velvet hung off of its horns in thick, meaty strips. The horns themselves had a pinkish, bloody hue to them. The moose stared at me as if contemplating something. Then finally, it moved. Only instead of going off the road like I'd been hoping, it turned towards my car. I'm no expert on animal behavior, but my gut told me that wasn't a good thing. My gut told me that it was getting ready to charge. It lowered its head before coming forward, and I realized that it was absolutely coming for me. In a panic, I threw my car into reverse and tried to make a hasty U-turn, but my SUV couldn't move fast enough. The moose hit my car hard enough to make the entire trunk crumple. The rear end of the car lifted off the ground, and I remember screaming blue murder. I half hoped to see the headlights of another oncoming car, but the road around me was empty. Nobody else was coming. The moose pulled back, shaking its head before it trotted away, giving itself some space to ram me again. My back wheels spun, but the car didn't move much. He'd busted something up. I still rolled along, back the way I came. Although I didn't get far before the moose hit me a second time, making my SUV fishtail and pushing me closer to the nearby road. I was screaming now, convinced that I was about to die. The moose was already winding up for another charge, and this time I knew he was going to hit the front of the car, and I was sure he'd kill me when he did. So I did the only thing that made sense at the time. I got out of the car. In hindsight, it probably wasn't the smartest idea. My mind was racing with panic, though, and since the car seemed too damaged to move in time, that seemed like the most logical way to prevent it from killing me. The moose charged a third time, ramming into my car with a deafening crash. I'd later see that his horns had poked right through the windshield and left gouges in my driver's side headrest. Had I stayed in the car, I likely would be dead. But I was out, and in my blind panic, the only thing I could think to do was run like heck. The only place to go was into the woods, and I didn't hesitate. I took off as fast as my legs could carry me, almost collapsing down an incline as I darted into the trees. I only looked back to see that moose staring at me with those empty eyes as it ripped its horns free of my battered SUV. I didn't see it start to follow me, but I figured it was going to. The trees swallowed me up, shrouding me in deep darkness. I could still see the twilight sky overhead, but in the forest, night had already fallen. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me as the moose followed me, but they didn't sound close. Something told me it hadn't found me just yet, and I didn't slow my pace to give it the chance. I just kept on heading in the direction I'd last seen the water from. I didn't really have much of a plan. I suppose I was thinking I could just jump in the water and escape the moose that way, which, in hindsight, was a terrible plan since I later learned that moose are excellent swimmers. This is a real fact, and I encourage you to look it up. I don't exactly know how long I was walking, but it was certainly for a while. My pace had slowed a little when I'd stopped hearing the moose, and while I hardly thought I was safe, I was trying to catch my breath while I could. I checked my cell phone, of course, but out in the middle of nowhere, I didn't have any reception. So really, all it was good for was a light, that and keeping track of time. I knew I'd been walking for a few hours when I finally reached the edge of the forest and could see the dark, rolling waters of the North Atlantic before me. There was something vaguely reassuring about that, although it really only meant I was on the coast. It wasn't like I'd be finding help anytime soon. I had no choice but to turn left and continue moving along the coast. I could only hope that I'd find someone eventually. I followed the water for another hour or so before I spotted something in the distance, a single soft light. It was far away, and I had no idea what it was, but I knew I needed to get to it. I must have run the rest of the way, and as I drew closer, I realized that the light was a window in a small house. It was perched on the edge of a rocky hill and looked run down and shabby. I still wasted no time in getting up to it and pounding on the door. "Hey, I need help!" "Please, my car was just attacked by a moose and I'm stranded," I called. The house looked deserted, but that didn't stop me. Someone had to be inside. There was light in the window. I pounded on the door again before trying the handle. To my surprise, the door creaked open, and I saw the warm, inviting light of a fire crackling inside. I opened the door, stepping in. The place was small and cozy. The floor creaked as I stepped inside, looking around. The floor wasn't huge, but it was certainly burning. although oddly enough, I didn't see anyone else inside. The furniture looked run down, the walls were grimy, and the floor was covered in dust and grime. But still, the fire burned and I took a deep breath as I finally took a moment to let my heart stop racing. I turned my attention towards the stairs that led up to the second floor. A soft creak of the wood told me that I wasn't alone. I heard footsteps coming down, heavy and ponderous footsteps. I backed away, looking up at the stairs to see a figure slowly emerge from the darkness of the upstairs hallway. It was another moose, the one that had attacked me on the road, only now it was standing on two legs, its massive antlers nearly brushing the ceiling. It stared down at me with those same empty eyes, head slightly cocked to the side while its hands rested on the banister. For a moment, I couldn't do anything except stare. I was so stunned by what I was seeing. And then, the moose began to move. It took a step forward, and its head bent down as it began to come towards me. Oh! That was enough to shake me out of my stupor. I bolted for the door as the thing came down the stairs. I could hear the heavy thuds of its footsteps as it followed me, but I was faster. I didn't even think to grab the door handle. I just slammed myself against it, causing it to burst open, and I didn't stop moving as I darted out into the cold night. I could hear it behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I made a break for the forest, and as I ran, I realized that my SUV wasn't too far from me. Somehow I had doubled back and didn't even realize it, but now I was running past it. I just kept moving. I didn't even slow down, and even after the thing's footsteps had stopped, I kept running. I wasn't taking any chances. You can already imagine what There were big birch trees in the forest, and I could hear it on the ground. Zip, 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 and next thing I knew, I must have run for hours before finally slowing down. The forest was gone, and I could see the open highway again. It was deserted, but at least I'd found it. Exhausted, I stumbled towards it, trying to wave down the first car that I saw. Luckily, they stopped and gave me a ride to my parents' place, income by chance. When we returned the next morning, my SUV was gone. We looked around for it, but never found it. The whole experience was strange, and I'll admit that I haven't been able to make any sense of it, but I suppose I'm lucky to have gotten out alive. Since then, I've never driven down that road again, and I don't plan to. Whatever was out there, I hope I never see it again. Road work ahead. Theo begins with a big dumb grin on his face. I can see the whites of his teeth in the corner of my eye. Yeah, I just, this car just, I saw this thing that bothered me and you supporting me and it straightened it out. Yeah, I sure hope it does, he finishes, chuckling as I mutter under my breath. I've always hated that stupid vine. How are we doing on time? I ask him, changing the subject. He checks his watch, his phone, and the car's clock. All in sync, dude. 2:17 a.m. We've got 5 minutes. Perfect, I respond as we drive down the length of a dark and empty highway. We're actually going to make it this time. Have we got far to go? No, I tell him. Just a bit further on. It's hard to see, but there are a lot of hills just ahead to the right. That's where we're going. Right, he responds, settling back into his seat. The highway stretches through a long, dark section of the country. There aren't many trees, but the cornfields grow high, tapering off as the hills rise. There's a subtle turnoff from the highway coming up, leading through these hills. That's where we're headed. You have to time it just right if you want to play the roadworks game. The clock ticks. 2:18 a.m. Damn, we're actually gonna make it, I reply. Are you nervous, man? Nervous? Theo laughs. Nothing's gonna happen, Dara. It is, I'm telling you. It's been done before, I reply as we race through the night, the engine a subtle backing track. Yeah, we'll see about that, Theo says as the corn and the hills roll by. The time ticks on. I shift in my seat, my throat going dry. Though Theo refuses to admit it, he's anxious too. The atmosphere in the vehicle has changed. We're here, I murmur, slowing the car as the clock ticks over to 2:10:01. Turn right, then you have reached your destination, the voice of the GPS announces. I do so, bringing the wheel around in an arc and turning off from the highway. I wind the car between the hills that rise up around us. At last, just as the clock hits 2:22, we come to a stop at a traffic light. It appears to be a temporary installment, but I've never known it not to be here. It is accompanied by a rusted yellow sign with a KS Construction logo printed in small letters on the top left. In the sign center, it reads simply, Roadworks. The traffic light's glow is red, highlighting our faces in its crimson glow. Nothing's happening, Theo mutters. Did we get the timings wrong? A part of me is disappointed, but a much greater part of me is relieved. Perhaps this was a dumb idea anyway. And then, as if in response to this thought, the traffic light does something I've never seen it do before. It changes to yellow, illuminating the road beneath it in bright amber. My adrenaline surges. Damn! Theo blurts out. He tries to say something but stumbles over his words. I don't speak. I know how to begin the game, and it's really very simple. I slam my foot down on the accelerator, and the car lurches back into life. The vehicle leaps forward, and I wind it around the traffic light and down through the hills. The time ticks to 2:23. We meander left and right, passing between hills of various heights and sizes, as I expected. But then the landscape changes. Instead of coming out of the hills and being led onto a parallel highway, as geography would expect, we are instead met with a vast, flat landscape as the hills pull back. It is a moonless night, and our only source of light comes from the beams of the car itself. Ahead is the road, and to either side are grim and empty fields, sparse pieces of rotted fence, dead crops, all fading away into the void at the light's edge, the total and surrounding darkness of the night. My heart pounds. Jesus, Theo says. Oh, God, this is real. It's real. We're playing. We're actually playing. Of course we are, I reply. I told you so. Remind me how it works again? His voice is tinged with fear now. I can hear it. The rules. What do we win? They say that the game gives you what you need the most. Great. He forces out a weak laugh. PlayStation 5 it is, then. Yeah, maybe, I reply, deadpan. If we win. What do you want? It's what you need, not what you want, Theo. Fine, what do you need? I consider. I don't know, man. A new family would be a good start. A new life. A new life. Yeah, Theo does not respond directly to this. We've talked about it before. Instead, he changes the subject. You said, if we win. If. So, how do we lose? I don't reply. I just grip the wheel a little tighter. We just have to stay on the road till the end, I say eventually. That's the rule of the game. Don't leave the road. Follow the road till the end. Till the end, he repeats. And we are quiet for a while after that, driving steadily through the wastes and the shadow. The tension rises until Theo can take it no longer. Let's put some tunes on, he says, tapping play on his phone, still oxed. What the hell? I ask him as the intro to Toto's Africa starts blaring obnoxiously from the speakers. Bro, turn that off. Oh, it's absolutely crazy to be in this show right now, right? As well as being hit with death threats by these greedily goofy people who have now been given the... I'm trying to think of the opening beat. Theo, turn it off. I reach out again, trying to grab his phone. It's not against the rules, is it? He starts to sing along, and I look down to the aux and pull it from the plug, and in that second, this split second that I have my eyes away from the road, the car drifts ever so slightly, and we've got to come back to the school the next day or something. Like, I'm getting totally granged. It lurches up and then back down with a thud. Christ! Theo shouts as we are slammed up and down in our seats. Panicked, I swing the steering wheel around and press my foot down on the brake, and the tires screech as the car comes to a quick stop. Still on the road, but now at a slight angle. We turn to look through the rear window. My pulse is racing. Theo is grabbing my shoulder. Dari, you hit something. Oh, God, what was it? Is it moving? I squint. It wasn't a person, was it? Did you see any movement? No, but I mean, it was dark, so... You were distracting me. May, what the hell, dude? But our fight comes to a quick halt as a beep bids us turn swiftly around. The GPS has begun to glitch and blink. Its pleasant white glow screen now shines in a sinister warning red. Black text appears across the ruby screen. Follow the road. We stare at this text, Theo and I. Then Theo glances back over his shoulder. His eyes widen. He mutters, "It's gone." I turn around to look, and sure enough, the large, dark shape that we hit in the road has vanished. I think we need to keep driving now, Theo says, as a creeping, lurking terror begins to slink into my mind. I don't respond. I don't need to. I just sit back in my seat, push down the handbrake, and drive us off quicker this time than I was driving before. The GPS remains unchanged. Black text on a red background. The car sails through the night. I don't know, dude. You know more about this game than me. It just disappeared. It must have been alive. Well, if it moved, then it must be fine, right? It wouldn't be a person. What would a person be doing on foot out here? Well, if it wasn't a person, then what was it? Theo has no response. My hands are clammy with sweat now. I wipe them one at a time on the side of my jeans. Dude, Theo murmurs. Is something in the fields. What do you mean? Look, he says quietly, and I do, peering to my left, then to my right. I can't help but catch glimpses of rustling in the long grasses. The headlights catch curious little shadows darting between the broken fence posts, but every time I try to look directly at one, it has already disappeared. More and more of this rustling takes place around us. Dozens, then hundreds. I put my foot down on the accelerator and the car picks up speed. Maybe we should turn back, Theo asks out loud then. We should turn back, bro. We should turn the hell back. No, I replied, determined. We're committed. We have to see the road through to the end. That's the rules. The quivering little shapes in the grasses fall back and away. The lights of the car catch on a person standing a little ways down the road. Oh my God, Theo yells. Look out! I swerve hard to avoid the figure. The car glides past her. I catch her face in the headlights. Just for a moment, a split second. It's a middle-aged woman. Or at least it was once. She's wearing a tattered yellow jacket, the kind that workers wear on construction sites. Her clothes are filthy. She looks like she's been walking through mud for hours. She does not scream as the car approaches. She just stares, unblinking, right into my eyes. Her jaw is slowly working up and down, but no sound escapes her open mouth. Errett smiled and fell to his knees, holding his arms. The blood drained from his face. I keep driving, and after the briefest hesitation, Theo's eyes snap forward, and he looks out of the rear window. She's gone, he breathes, his voice shaking. She's gone, man. She just vanished. Don't look back, Theo, I tell him. Don't look back. He turns back around and stares out the front window instead. I tell myself to focus on the road. And we follow the road. The clock ticks over to 2:25 a.m. We approach another temporary traffic light. It is dead, off. No light shines from it. Beside it, another sign stands. The sign, identical to the first, now reads, "End of road works." Theo exhales deeply. Thank Christ, I was starting to get really freaked out there, he says. As he speaks, the road ahead begins to change. It is so subtle at first that I almost don't notice. The road is getting narrower, bit by bit, foot by foot, growing tighter and tighter. The edge of the car's wheels slowly grazes the dirt at the road's sides. Is it getting tighter, or is it just me? Theo asks with a forced chuckle. It's getting tighter, I reply, leaning forward. Damn, how much further do you think we've got? I don't know, Theo. I really don't know. Do we turn around? He looks at me, and the fear on his face has returned. No, he replies, quietly. Let's see it through. If we turn around now, we'll regret it forever. The car presses forward. The road continues to narrow. The door is nearly scraping against the dirt walls of the path, and then, with another sudden drop, the earth falls away, and we shoot out and over a wide, murky river. The concrete highway glistens as it passes beneath us, but it is thin, precariously thin. Only a few more meters, and the edges will scrape the car doors, and we will be trapped. I press down harder on the gas, but the car, instead of responding to my command, begins to gradually slow down. Come on, I mutter under my breath. Come on, you piece of crap. Dara, something's on the road. It's in the way. I squint, and sure enough, a shadowy figure, barely more than a shadow, has appeared ahead. It is a single worker standing in the middle of the road. He's wearing a hard hat. He's facing away from us. I can't even see his face. "What is he doing?" Theo asks in a panic. "Is he real, or is he some part of the game?" "I don't know, bro. Should we drive around him? There's no way to fit the car past him. Should we drive through him then? Just hit him?" I hesitate, but as the car begins to grind to a halt, I press my foot down hard. It does little to help. The wheels squeal as they struggle to grip the road. The needle of the speedometer creeps to 0. "Oh God, dare drive. We need to drive. We need to..." He stops dead as the worker turns to face us. The man is old beyond years. His flesh hangs from his skull, revealing bone and open wounds beneath. He grins at us. His eye sockets are empty and black. But we can't escape. The car comes to a complete stop as the road grinds to an end. All I hear is silence. There's nothing else, no sound at all, no birds, no wind, no traffic. Just silence. I am too scared to even try to reverse. The worker leans toward the car. I panic. Theo is shaking me by the shoulder, but I ignore him. All my focus is on the old man. My heart races. It feels like it's going to break through my rib cage. But then the old man starts to sing. It starts as a murmur, but as the seconds go by, his voice gets louder. He hums a quiet and terrible melody. He starts to sing softly, under his breath. I don't recognize the words. They aren't in English or any other language I've ever heard. They're nonsense, gibberish. But their meaning is terrifying all the same. The worker slowly steps around the car and walks back the way we came, crossing in front of us and heading down the highway. And as he moves, more workers begin to appear. They rise from the dirt, from the road, from the fields, pulling themselves up from the depths of the earth. One by one, they appear. Silent, empty. Workers in yellow jackets. The workers, tall and gaunt, begin to turn in our direction, humming and singing the same song as the first. I turn the key in the ignition, trying to start the car again, but the engine just coughs and splutters. "They're getting closer," Theo breathes. "Get out of the car!" I shout. Theo's door opens with a creak. He steps out, his hands shaking. I fumble with my seatbelt and practically throw myself from the car. We have no idea where to go. There is only the thin strip of road with the silent river on either side. The workers approach in droves now, surrounding the car and approaching us with their vacant eyes. Though, man, we're screwed. "Maybe," Theo replies, "but maybe we aren't. This is the game, right? The game gives you what you need the most." "What are you talking about?" "I'm saying maybe this is what I need." And before I can stop him, Theo walks right up to the nearest worker, and with eyes full of tears and teeth gritted in terror, he grabs the man's hands. The worker looks down at him. "What are you doing, Theo Sobasab?" I shout. "This is what I need, Dara. I'm sorry." And then, without warning, the worker reaches forward and wraps his arms around Theo. I run toward them, but I'm too slow. Theo slumps, his eyes rolling back in his head as the worker tightens his grip. I try to pull them apart, but the worker's grip is iron. Theo's body is limp. His eyes are closed, and then he collapses to the ground. The worker releases him and begins to step toward me. Theo's breathing slows and stops. The worker's eyes, vacant and black, look deep into mine. His mouth opens wide, and from deep within his throat comes a ghastly shriek. Shriek. I stumble backward, terrified. I trip and fall into the river below. The cold water envelops me, and for a moment, everything is silent again. I swim to the surface, gasping for air. When I emerge, the workers have vanished. The road, the signs, everything is gone. It's as if it never existed. I drag myself to the shore, breathing heavily. My heart pounds in my chest as I lie on the cold, wet ground, staring up at the starless sky. Theo is gone. The game is over. But I know I'll never be free of it. I'm the kind of person who finds peace in nighttime drives. The darkness, the empty streets, and the silence of the sleeping world have a calming effect on me. It's like the world pauses just for me, giving me space to think, reflect, and enjoy the solitude. That night started like any other. I was driving home from my friend's place, about a 30-minute trip through back roads and wooded areas. It was the kind of drive that's peaceful, where you can roll down the windows and let the cool night air in, accompanied only by the cool night air in, accompanied only by the chirping of the engine and the chirping of crickets. But something was different that night. Something felt off. The road was unusually quiet, even for that time of night. No headlights appeared in my rearview mirror. No cars came from the opposite direction. It was just me, the road, and the trees lining the sides, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The sky was clear, a thin sliver of moon casting a pale light over everything, but it did little to chase away the shadows. As I drove deeper into the woods, the trees seemed to close in, their dark shapes pressing against the sides of the road. A chill crawled up my spine as I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. That instinctual warning that something wasn't right. I shook it off, chalking it up to nerves or maybe just the eerie stillness of the night. But then I heard it. At first I thought it was my imagination, just the wind rustling through the leaves, or maybe the creak of an old branch. But then it came again, clearer this time, a scream, high-pitched and desperate, cutting through the silence like a knife. My heart skipped a beat, and I instinctively slowed down, straining to hear. The scream came again, a woman's voice filled with terror and pain. It was coming from the woods just beyond the trees. I pulled over, my mind racing. Should I investigate? Call the police? Every instinct in me said to get out of there, but another part of me, a stronger, perhaps more foolish part, felt compelled to help. What if she needed help? Grabbing my phone and flashlight, I stepped out of the car into the cool night air. The forest was dark, the trees casting long shadows across the ground. I could still hear the scream, faint, but unmistakable, coming from somewhere deep within the woods. I hesitated at the edge of the road, my pulse pounding in my ears. Everything in me screamed to get back in the car, to drive away and forget I had heard anything. But I couldn't just leave, not knowing what was happening out there. So, against my better judgment, I stepped into the trees. As I walked deeper into the woods, the scream grew louder, I tried to follow the sound, my flashlight illuminating the darkness ahead, but the beam felt weak against the inky blackness surrounding me. The trees were thick, their branches brushing against me like cold fingers, and the ground was uneven, littered with fallen leaves and twigs that crunched underfoot. The farther I went, the more I questioned my decision. I wasn't a hero, just an ordinary guy who liked night drives and quiet moments. What was I doing, wandering into the woods in the middle of the night? But the scream kept pulling me forward, driving me deeper into the forest. And then, suddenly, it stopped. The silence was deafening, the abrupt absence of sound more terrifying than the scream itself. I stood there, frozen, my heart racing as I scanned the trees with my flashlight. But there was nothing, just the darkness and the oppressive stillness of the woods. A wave of fear washed over me, cold and paralyzing. What if this was a trap? What if someone was luring me into the woods for some sinister purpose? My mind raced with possibilities, each more horrifying than the last. I could feel my breath quicken, my hands shaking as I gripped the flashlight. Then, out of the silence, I heard it again. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper, carried on the wind. I strained to listen, turning slowly on the spot. And then I heard it clearly. It was behind me, heavily as a cloud might be hidden by a fog-taking meditation. And I heard it clearly. It was behind me. I spun around, the flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. But there was nothing there, just trees and shadows. The whisper continued, closer now, brushing against my ear like a cold breath. "Help me." The voice was soft, pleading, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was the same voice that had screamed, but now it was different, less desperate, more insistent, as if it were trying to draw me closer. The normalcy of the night drive had completely evaporated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of dread. I was no longer in control, no longer enjoying the solitude. Now I was trapped in a nightmare, a dark and twisted version of the peace I had sought. I started to back away, my instincts screaming at me to run, to get out of the woods before it was too late. But the voice followed me, growing louder, more urgent. "Help me." I couldn't see her, but I could feel her presence, close and menacing. The flashlight beam flickered, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a shadowy figure just at the edge of the light. But when I focused, it was gone. The whisper grew more insistent, the voice taking on a sharper, more demanding tone. "Help me." My blood turned to ice. The voice was no longer pleading, it was threatening. I could feel the cold breath on my neck, sending shivers down my spine. I turned and ran, stumbling over roots and fallen branches, desperate to get back to my car. But the voice didn't let up. It followed me, hissing in my ear, each word dripping with malice. "Help me. I need you." I broke through the trees, the road just ahead, my car parked where I'd left it, but the voice was right behind me now, so close I could feel the breath on my skin. Icy and sharp. "Help me or you'll never leave." I reached the car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. Oh no. The whisper was in my ear now, cold and venomous, wrapping around my mind like a noose. Help me, or you'll regret it. I finally managed to get the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. My heart was pounding, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I locked the doors, turned the key in the ignition, praying the engine would start. For a moment, nothing happened. The car was dead, the engine refusing to turn over. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a figure, standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the reach of the headlights. It was a woman, or at least something that looked like a woman. Her face was obscured, hidden in the shadows, but I could feel her eyes on me, burning with anger and hatred. And then she started to move, gliding toward the car with unnatural speed. The girl overweight, showing bare bones against the fabric of her black dress. The engine roared to life, and I slammed my foot on the gas. The tires screeched as I peeled out onto the road, the figure disappearing from view, swallowed by the darkness. But the voice stayed with me, echoing in my mind. Help me, or you'll never leave. Repetitive. I drove faster than I ever had before, the road a blur of trees and shadows. The voice slowly faded, replaced by the roar of the engine and the pounding of my heart. But the fear remained, a cold knot in the pit of my stomach. I didn't stop until I reached my driveway, the safety of home finally within reach. But even as I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, something dark and malevolent. I collapsed on the couch, my hands still shaking, my mind racing with what I had experienced. What was she? Why had she called out to me? And what would have happened if I hadn't run? I turned on the TV, hoping to drown out the lingering fear with the comforting noise of the world, but the news only deepened my dread. A woman's body had been found in the woods that night, just a few miles from where I had been. The details were scarce, but the reporter mentioned something that made my blood run cold. She had been found alone, her body cold and stiff, her face twisted in terror. The story ended with a request for anyone with information to come forward, but I knew I wouldn't be one of them. What could I say? That I had heard her screams, followed them into the woods, and then ran like a coward when I felt her presence? No, I kept my mouth shut. But the fear didn't go away. It lingered, a dark shadow at the edge of my thoughts, whispering in the back of my mind. Help me or you'll regret it. I haven't driven that road since, and I never will. But every now and then, when I'm alone in the dark, I think I hear her voice again, soft and distant, calling me back. Help me. And I know, deep down, that if I ever listen, if I ever go back, I'll never leave.